And I have the pleasure of introducing Caleb Maupin, who is a journalist, a political analyst, and a self-described 21st century socialist. We are running late, and so I have to give lots of thanks to Maupin's extreme patience with us and even technical malfunction. Thank you so much, Caleb, for allowing us to steal some of your time and to share with us your insights onto what's going on right now in the United States and abroad on these very sensitive and very complicated matters. So thank you so much for that.
Sure, pleasure to be here.
Wonderful. So going back to the other question, so we will edit this.
Okay.
Why is it then, if according to your eyes, Bernie Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez are not explicitly socialist, why do you think then that they would try to really make an emphasis on adopting this brand of socialism, like really go out of their way to self-title themselves, brand themselves as socialist, when the way I look at it, I would say that in the United States traditionally there has been a sort of a stigma attached to the word socialist, communist, all of these things. In fact, we see how Bernie Sanders was so fiercely attacked here in South Florida because of former praises that he did to the Sandinistas, the Cuban Revolution, Chavez even. Do you think that it is possible that they have tried to adopt this name in their campaigns, as if maybe the word socialism has been acquiring a different connotation worldwide or in the United States?
Well, I first want to point out that for a lot of U.S. history, socialism was not as heavily stigmatized as it has been since the Cold War. You know, I pointed out to people before that the first person to use the word socialism in the English language was Robert Owen. Robert Owen set up shop and built a socialist commune in Indiana called New Harmony, and he actually gave speeches on socialism to joint sessions of the U.S. Congress. Edward Bellamy, it was his brother, Francis Bellamy, who wrote the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. And Edward Bellamy wrote a best-selling novel called Looking Backward, portraying a socialist United States in the far-off future. Very popular. Franklin Roosevelt met with socialist and communist organizers at the White House. Abraham Lincoln had a communist general in the Union Army named August Willich, who led soldiers into battle against slavery. Communists have always been an important part of U.S. history. The same with socialists. It was really with the dawn of the Cold War that this stigma really began. And I think the problem is that the way discourse has been framed, whenever we want a progressive reform in the United States, the right wing calls it socialism or calls it communism. And people my age, I'm a millennial, right? But millennials and Zoomers, they've spent their entire lives hearing, well, hey, why can't we have free healthcare like in Europe? You can't do that. That's communism. That's socialism. Oh, well, why do we have to be in debt for student debt? I mean, couldn't we have free education like they do? I mean, you can't do that. That's socialism. That's communism. So after a while, we have a generation of Americans, young Americans, that are throwing up their hands and saying, okay, fine, I guess I'm a socialist. That's really what's going on here. It's a response to neoliberalism, this attempt by the far, far right wing to portray anything progressive, anything trying to change the nature of society and make things easier for working families as an evil communist plot has resulted in destigmatization. And honestly, you can draw some parallels to how the far left for a long time used the word fascist and Nazi so liberally, to the point that on many far right-wing circles now, they kind of laugh it off. They don't think it's a big deal. When you change the meaning of these words and turn them into political pejoratives to attack your opponents, they start to lose their meaning. And I think the Bernie Sanders AOC movement is a response. It's a blowback to years of neoliberalism, free market extremism, and privatizations that have resulted in big economic problems done in the name of anti-communism.
Now, I'm not sure if this question, we talked about it, I'm not sure if it was said off camera or not, but AOC and a lot of her followers, a lot of people on Twitter that are especially using the red rose, a lot of them self-identify as democratic socialist, but you said that you're a 21st century socialist. Can you describe the essential differences between those two? Because for most people, they might be interchangeable. They might mean the same thing. Are there marked differences?
I would say so. The understanding of socialism that goes back to Marx or even before Karl Marx, that was used by Eugene Debs, that was used by the Marxists, that was used by Bolivarians, by Ba'athist Arab socialism in the Middle East, is used today in China. The understanding is that socialism is a society where the banks, factories, and industries and major centers of economic power function to serve the people and not simply to serve the profits of private owners, right? Socialism is the understanding that we need the economy to be reorganized in order to serve public good, and the state should organize and control production in order to ensure unlimited economic growth and poverty alleviation. We should have a centrally planned economy to serve the people. That's socialism. And what AOC and Bernie Sanders advocate is just more of a European welfare state. They want free college. They want free health care. I'm for that. I'm not opposed to that. They want higher minimum wage laws and protections. I'm for that. They want to tax the rich more and takes the tax burden off the middle class and working people. I'm for all of that, but that's not socialism. Socialism is a new economic order. It's not simply capitalism with some slight changes and reforms.
Speaking of reforms, do you suppose that a certain amount of reforms that kind of satisfy people's most urgent demands kind of make a socialism of the type that you want a little bit sometimes just impossible to reach? Because if you do reform capitalism the way some European nations have done, do you think then that is it's a sabotage of implementing 21st century socialism? Or is it a complementary thing?
I think the only reason those reforms come about is because of the threat of revolution. The reason that the European welfare states emerged was because the Soviet Union came out of the Second World War very strong. And all across Europe after World War II, in France, in Italy, in many different countries, the communist parties were winning the elections by big numbers. People were voting for them. Yes. And in order to kind of keep the people away from revolution, out of fear that there could be a real transition toward communism, some of the rich and powerful began to be okay with implementing these welfare state reforms. It was a way of holding back. It was a way of stabilizing society and preventing an oncoming revolution. And those reforms were won. And here in the United States, I mean, a lot of people died to get us Social Security. A lot of people died to get us the 8-hour workday. Yes. And the Roosevelt administration, it passed those reforms because it was in an alliance with progressives, with socialists and communists against a very big fascist threat. Let's not forget there was an attempted military coup against Roosevelt in 1934 called the Business Plot, where the generals tried to remove him and install a fascist dictatorship. And because Roosevelt, he wanted to stabilize society, he didn't want fascism and military rule, he had to align himself with progressive forces, and that meant creating Social Security, hiring the unemployed, that these reforms come about as a result of popular struggles in which socialists and communists and revolutionaries take the lead. They're not simply a conspiracy to hold off socialism. That's not the case at all. There's something that is won, and that when big reforms are taking place and when big gains are made, that shows people that if they get involved in the political process and they become active, they can win things. And I think that reforms often pave the way to even bigger reforms and revolutions because it shows people that they have power, and that by coming into the political process, by changing things, they can actually have an impact.
Yeah, what you mentioned, the Soviet Union, the real effect, the results that are achieved through protests and all that. Before I get into the protest one, do you suppose that now the United States has a problem? What do I mean now? I mean after the fall of the Soviet Union. Do you suppose then that it hurt the United States to not have that kind of foe, that kind of political enemy? Because like when you speak to people that were very happy in the 80s and the whole Rocky era, sometimes they'll mention not exactly make an emphasis on how well economically speaking they were off, but they kind of just look back with nostalgia. And of course the Trump campaign did do that, trying to remind people of just how wonderful some of them felt in terms of pride, in terms of national pride. And with this reactionary call to going back to a time in which things were wonderful, because clearly things are not so wonderful now, do you suppose that we could assume that there is some sort of like an identity crisis, that there is no clear plan? Because like when you hear Biden saying, oh, this nation needs clear leadership, I mean, I don't think Biden per se has the ability to give the United States the kind of leadership it needs, but neither is Trump. But it is quite obvious for many that there is a need for a type of guidance, a sort of let's figure out what are we and where are we going from now on, especially in the wake of this pandemic, which, 40 million people unemployed. There is this new focus. I mean, you see that China's already kind of like their view now, their position now for their future economy is going to be more focused, the way that I heard it, more focused on making it a priority, the national internal markets. And there's talks of, more closed borders, again, nationalism really becoming strong. Would you say then that there is not a lack of leadership, because that's obvious, but can we say that the American identity has suffered after the fall of the Soviet Union, and right now kind of is having an identity crisis?
Absolutely. I mean, the problem, I think, started during the Cold War, when the definition of what it means to be an American got linked up to free markets and greed. And that's not who we are as a people. Yes, free markets and the American dream and working hard, we're entrepreneurial. But the American people are also the people that defeated slavery and a mass progressive upsurge. The American people are also Dr. Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. The American people built labor unions and heroically fought on the picket lines for working families. And during the Cold War, there was such an effort to tell people that your identity as an American is tied up with greed, profits, get the government off our backs. If someone's poor and suffering, that's not your problem. And that has really, tampered with our minds as a country. And we've kind of lost our identity and our sense of community. And it has done a number on us, no doubt. I mean, we have lost a sense of who we are as a people. And we're in this weird period where now many young people are angry. We see what's happening on the streets across America right now in response to police brutality. And unfortunately, a lot of these younger people that are mad about police brutality, that are mad about the system, they're lighting American flags on fire, they're saying F the USA and all of that. Why? Because they've been told that what it means to be an American is you have to agree with all these things they're very angry at. And the progressive side of America has been largely eroded. When I was in Iran, I saw Iranians chanting death to America. I knew they weren't chanting against my family. I knew they weren't chanting against the people who live in my neighborhood and just want to feed their kids and get by. They were chanting against a system that America, our country, has become synonymous with greed, war, militarism, grinding countries into poverty, death, and destruction. That's something that all Americans should be angry about. That's not who we are as a people, but our progressive side has been eroded. And as we watch the country in chaos, we're seeing the loss of a progressive side of the American people, the progressive American identity. The right wing has declared that they own what America stands for. And because of that, people are rejecting America and turning against the whole country.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I've noticed in certain small but very loud counter protests here, where they mention that anybody who's protesting in defense of George Floyd is actually Antifa, they're just a bunch of terrorists. They actually want to steal and burn the country. It's not for George Floyd. It's not for Black Lives Matter. And then, of course, the age-old accusation that these protests are anti-patriotic. And then they respond, of course, by taking out Confederate flags even, which is absurd, taking out a Confederate flag here in Miami. But I feel as if this whole this situation that we have right now unfolding, clearly the protests have had a result. It might spoil us. It might remind us how dangerous that when we actually come together and take to the streets and stick to one issue, united, we actually can execute change and do good things. But I feel like on the really radical Trump side, they are spinning this around as if it's a fight against communism. And so, it's just upsetting because it's like deepening this, intensifying this really dangerous red baiting culture that it's just becoming like a witch hunt. I mean, it's the reason why so many people abandoned eventually my campaign, because I recently tried to run for Congress, and the Miami Herald took on an article saying that, oh, she's just a communist, and then of course, it's like, oh, the plague, avoided. And do you think it has intensified? I mean, do you think it's going to get worse? What's your take on this situation? On how every time we try to push for something, they just try to brandish it as communism? I mean, the name calling is fine, you know, sticks and stones and all that. It's just words. But I fear that eventually it will get ugly, and that they're just going to end up taking away some of our civil rights in that process. I mean, they're not just going to be happy name calling. I'm pretty sure that they want even more, which is why you see that they titled Antifa as just a terrorist organization.
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, Antifa kind of could be anything. Anyone could put a black mask on their face and beat up a white supremacist and say they're Antifa. Now, are there networks of people that do that? Sure, but this labeling of that there's this scary group of people that are running around beating up random conservatives, be very afraid, hide in your home. And this is just classic Fox News hysteria. I mean, we've heard it before. Now, that's not to say that no one on the left is ever engaging in these kind of activities, but there is no official organized Antifa. Mm-hmm. It refers to a lot of different people that do a lot of different things. But as far as the anti-communism, I think it's very generational, right? And that Trump very much is trying to appeal to people that remember the good old days, that remember the times when the economy was good and things weren't as bad as they are. There was more of a clear understanding of right and wrong, where Ronald Reagan said that we're all friends after 6, and Democrats and Republicans, maybe they differed on tactics, but they all kind of basically thought the same thing, especially about foreign policy. And, it's trying to appeal to the good old days. I mean, when Trump gets up and gives speeches against the Soviet Union and the UN years after the Soviet Union has even existed, he's trying very much to, he's playing on an older constituency of people who vote and people who are in red states or in battleground states like Ohio, where I come from, or Pennsylvania or Michigan. And he's trying to remind them that he is the defender of the America that they see slipping away, right? He's trying to say, you're afraid, you're seeing the security and the prosperity of the good old days slipping away. I stand for that America you want back. It's good theater, it's good theatrics, but it's ultimately not going to work. And what you're noticing is that among the younger generation, it doesn't really work. I mean, it's not clear. At this point, the United States wages its foreign policy mainly in the name of spreading human rights. They don't like a regime, they accuse it of violating human rights, they then attack it in the name of spreading human rights. It's not done on this ideological anti-communist basis.
Do you agree? Do you agree then that they've kind of like lowered the tone on promoting liberty and are now more on just the human rights? Because I also get the impression that they don't really focus so much in terms of this push, this anti-regime change policy, right? Like I feel like the fight for liberty has kind of like downgraded, and yes, that it's more nowadays focused on, let me get rid of you because you're violating human rights.
I think that there is a division, between the rich and powerful and between the leaders of this country, the intelligence agencies and the military and such. Because if you look at Joe Biden, you look at Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, or the Hillary Clinton State Department, they're thinking long term. How can we work to roll back the influence of anti-imperialist and socialist countries? How can we destabilize and overthrow countries? How can we do it very, very effectively? Whereas Trump is tied with the military that wants to make a lot of money selling weapons, the military-industrial complex. Right. Trump is tied in with your Miami Cuban crowd, and in Miami that they want to overthrow Venezuela, they want to overthrow Cuba. They're not concerned about anything to make life worse in those countries, more sanctions, more problems. He's tied in with the Iranian exile community, in Los Angeles. Same attitude. They're not thinking long term. They just want to make things worse for Iran, destabilize Iran, hurt Iran. Are tied in with folks in the Likud party in Israel, which has a different strategy and sees whipping up hysteria against Iran as strategic and in Israel's short-term interest. And so Trump is thinking about the short-term interest of particular constituencies that like to hear that he's attacking Iran, that like to hear he's attacking Venezuela and Cuba, but aren't really thinking long-term about the rise of Russia and China and the increasing international alternative. I call it the Eurasian alternative of, the new economy that's emerging, that's kind of pushing the United States and Britain and Western capitalism off the stage and creating this economic alternative. Trump's folks are not thinking about geopolitics. They're thinking about specific short-term interests and specific immigrant constituencies that have a direct mission that they're on. And that's the difference. There's a division there, and that's really the divide. Trump likes to put on a show, and he likes to show, the Likud party in Israel. He likes to show the Iranian exile community. He likes to show the Miami crowd. He likes to show them that he's on their side. He'll beat his chest. He'll scream and yell, and he'll say the kind of things that they want to hear. But he's not really thinking long-term about the interests of Western capitalism and rolling back Russia, China, and the countries aligned with them around the world.
Right. You mentioned that even the Trump base is quite conscious of the decline in America's influence around the world, economically speaking, militarily speaking. I mean, just on many different fields, the United States has kind of fallen back, and that's why there are projections that within less than 10 years, China is going to overtake the United States in terms of economic power around the world. Why is it that, because it depends on who you talk to. Obviously, the Trump base will say that the left did this. If you speak to a union leader, they'll say that, well, because we let China steal our jobs. So a lot of times there are many different interpretations, especially if you speak to the religious community that will just say it's because of sin, right? So I want to know, why is it that, I mean, I know it's a serious question. I mean, why is it that we are collapsing? But you're a political analyst, and I am pretty sure that you could kind of sum it up for us as to why is it that the United States has fallen behind? Why is it that it's not so great anymore?
Well, the simple answer is free trade, Adam Smith, neoliberal economics. You can go back to the American Revolution, though. The American Revolution began because the colonies, the 13 colonies, were having British free trade economics imposed on them. They weren't being allowed to develop their own industries, their own manufacturing. They were being held back economically and being held as, vassals of big multinational corporations like the East India Company and such. And so they had a revolution, and they broke free from the British, and then they started building infrastructure, right? Building the lighthouses. That was Alexander Hamilton's big program. And they set up a national bank that would lend people money on the basis of being in the national interest. And they had a very much government-involved economic system that allowed the United States to flourish economically. But that's changed, right? Now in the United States, we believe in free trade. We believe in the ideology of Adam Smith. We believe in the teachings of Alan Greenspan and Friedrich von Hayek and neoliberalism. And we believe that greed is good, and that the profits in command is best. The state shouldn't intervene and protect people. And the result has not only been the destruction of so many economies around the world that trade with us, but also domestically. I mean, we're at the point where our water's not being properly purified in the United States. We got power plants that are crumbling. We've got roads that are falling apart. In a number of states across the USA, they are unpaving the roads, right? They have this machine called a reclaimer, because municipalities cannot afford to maintain paved roads. They are pulling up the asphalt and replacing paved roads with dirt roads, right? That's the reality of the United States. Why? Because private is always best. The market is always best. We can't invest in the public. I mean, we've been experimenting with school choice for the longest time, right? Charter schools for profit. Our education system is quite an embarrassment internationally. The lowest test scores. All based on this belief, free markets and capitalism is always the answer, and it's leading to us falling apart. Whereas, if you look at China, right? Yes, they moved away from Mao Zedong and the totally Soviet-style state-run economy, but it's not a capitalist country. I mean, the banking is run by the government. The government controls major industries. They have 5-year economic plans, and they're building a state-controlled economy in order to alleviate poverty. And they go to developing countries and they build railway. They build power plants, and they build hospitals, and they build airports. Whereas when the United States goes to developing countries, they loan them money and they demand they cut the public budget, and they cut their public power, they cut their sanitation workers, they cut their spending. This leads to the economy falling to pieces and American companies coming in and dominating them, right? As a result of NAFTA, Mexico, people have been farming in Mexico for thousands and thousands of years. Now, Mexico imports most of its food from the United States. That's the result of NAFTA. This is the destruction of economies. It leads to one giant global economy where a few multinational corporations and bankers on Wall Street and in the London Stock Exchange make super profits, and the whole world gets poor. People have asked me what the definition of imperialism is, and I've said imperialism is keeping the world poor so that Wall Street and London can stay rich. And the problem is, it used to be that part of making imperialism work was maintaining a middle class at home of well-paid steel workers and automakers and other people who they got paid to decent wage. They had a wife and a kid and a house in the suburbs, and that was the basis through which the United States could go to Vietnam and Korea and go all over Africa and destroy economies while building up a middle class at home. But now, because of the computer revolution, mainly, they don't need workers at the assembly line. And we've got a situation where the same thing that they've done to Africa, the same thing they've done to Latin America, the same thing they've done all over Asia, they're now doing in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Ohio and Iowa and Nebraska. We are seeing the demolition of the American middle class in order to make sure that profits continue to flow into the hands of a very, very small group of bankers and billionaires that run the world. That's imperialism. And it doesn't work, right? It doesn't work. People around the world want to rise up out of poverty. They want to have their kids go to decent schools. They want to have electricity. They want to have running water. You're not going to get that with the IMF. You're not going to get that with the World Bank. So people are turning to the Belt and Road Initiative from China, the Eurasian Economic Union from Russia. They're turning to the BRICS. They're turning to the ALBA Bank, the Bolivarian alternative of Latin America, that functions in a different way. It has a different way of relating. I mean, compare the situation in Nicaragua economically to the rest of Central America. Compare Nicaragua to Guatemala. Compare Nicaragua to Honduras, right? I mean, people aren't fleeing from Nicaragua. I mean, the results of Nicaragua's economic program in alliance with China, in alliance with Russia, has been much more positive, whereas Guatemala and Honduras have had free trade. They've had the United States in there, and it's destroyed the place. I mean, and now there's people fleeing to the United States. There's refugees. I mean, this is the result of free trade, British Empire, Adam Smith economics, which the United States began as breaking away from, but now the United States not only has it at home, but goes around spreading it around the world. It's economic insanity. I always tell people, if you want to understand British, Adam Smith, capitalist, free market economics, let's talk about this. If you have two apples and you take one apple away, then you have one apple, and one apple is less than two apples. So if you can understand that, you can understand that cutting does not lead to growth. The premise of free trade economics, which the United States promotes, is that cutting leads to growth. You can cut your way to economic growth. It has never worked anywhere in the world. It has been catastrophic everywhere it's ever been tried. This doesn't work. You cannot cut your way into growth.
Bearing in mind that during this pandemic, many people lost their jobs. Small businesses that make up, of course, the working middle class in the United States have gone out of business. Many of them did not have a chance. I know certain business owners here in South Florida that they just simply could not have access to these loans, to these grants, to these government funds. And yet we can read on the news how big corporations in the United States have actually made a ton of more money. Amazon is just skyrocketing. I would not want to live in the United States, in which Amazon basically does all of our services. Do you suppose then that because of this pandemic, it's now more urgent, or it's going to be more difficult, just fighting to protect workers' rights? How do you see like the immediate future? I mean, what kind of outcomes can we expect that perhaps this pandemic and now with this social unrest, with the protests, are kind of accelerating? What do you think is the immediate result of all of this whole scenario of people not really knowing what they're going to do with their lives? Like, I know young people that are saying, well, I had it difficult before. I don't know now what kind of job I'm going to get. What kind of industry should I go into? And people who are stuck paying student loans, what are they now going to do? So a lot of people are just wanting to look for some guidance. What do we do from this point on? And I don't mean, of course, just at the electoral level, which I would love to get your opinion on, what you think the average voter can do to vote his way out of these problems. So what are your predictions?
Well, if you look at the United States the way it is right now, we are facing an economic meltdown as a result of this pandemic, but as a result of bigger problems in the lead up to it. The fact that we have a gig economy where people don't have regular employment. They work as Uber drivers. They work when they can get it. So many people are just left behind. This isn't going to work. And I mean, I have said that there are 4 dramatic steps that could be taken that would lead to re-energizing the U.S. economy. The first would be a mass jobs program. Hire millions of young people and put them to work rebuilding the roads, rebuilding the power plants, rebuilding the water treatment facilities, building new universities and new schools, new post offices, all the things that are falling apart all across the United States. Hire young people, pay them a decent wage to build it. The second thing, and I guess you ask how we're going to pay for it, should be public control of oil and natural gas and coal and timber, natural resources, right? The wealth of the earth of the country of the United States of America should belong to the people of the United States of America. All across this country, there's all kinds of fracking going on, right? Where big banks and corporations are making lots of money off the oil and gas underneath our feet, while a lot of the very states where all these profits are being made are economically falling apart. It should be the American people and the country as a whole that profits from our oil and our natural gas, our coal, our timber. All of our natural resources should be publicly controlled. The profits from them should go into the public budget. That's step number 2. Step number 3 is banking, right? And people want to talk about communism and socialism. You forget all of that, right? Read the Bible, read the Quran, read the Talmud, right, and the Torah. They all say that lending money at interest is not acceptable. And there's a reason for that. Because when you lend money at interest, you get a group of people who make money by having money. They lent you money, you paid it back, they have money. They didn't create anything in the process. And pretty soon, they're wealthier than everyone else. And everyone is in debt to them. And governments get in debt to them. And you have a big problem. Well, the Constitution of the United States says that the printing of money should be in the hands not of a private corporation like the Federal Reserve, but in the hands of the government, of the people, right? And so we need to have banking under public control. It needs to be a situation where the state lends money, and it lends money on the basis of doing what is in the interest of the country overall, right? If someone wants to open a business, they need to make the case that it's good for the community to do it. They should get their loan, and then when they pay it back, the interest goes into the public budget so we can build more schools, more hospitals, more education. That would be step number 3, public control of banking. And the 4th step would be to enact Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights. Guarantee everyone the right to a job, the right to housing, the right to education, right? And make it the priority of the government to ensure that people have access to jobs and housing and education and all the things they need to get by. If we took those 4 steps, right? If the country were re-energized with a mass public construction program, if we took public control over our natural resources, if we organized banking to serve the public and put it in public hands, and then if we started ensuring an economic Bill of Rights, this country would blossom. It would boom. It would be like a renaissance here. Those 4 steps would save the country, and those 4 steps would basically involve us becoming a socialist country at that point. We would have a planned economy, not an economy that's organized to serve profits.
And now to wrap up, how do you think that the average voter can fix things? Because I know plenty of people, I'm pretty sure you know them too, that simply, don't show up at the polls because to them the Democratic Republican Party is essentially all the same. That's why voter apathy is so rampant. What do you usually tell people that want change, that want something good for the United States, and are not afraid of this whole labeling, oh, don't call me this, or nothing like that? People that are genuinely interested in the welfare of this country. Or even you yourself, like, how do you go about voting in the United States? I mean, I say so because, it's an election year.
Well, I mean, as a journalist, I don't endorse any candidate. I don't campaign for anybody.
Okay.
And normally there is a lot of scolding of the public because of our low voter turnout. We say to the public, how dare you, you need to get more involved. I put it the other way around. I put that to the political leaders. I say, these political leaders, be they Democrats, Republicans, why aren't they generating more enthusiasm from the people? Why are they not inspiring people to get more involved? If you look at it, AOC, she's very popular. And a lot of people who never voted before went to vote for her in the election because she generated that enthusiasm from the public. She got people excited about politics. And the same for Bernie Sanders. Look at his rallies, packed full of young people, millennials and Zoomers, just excited about him. When you do that, you energize people.